Good afternoon, and welcome to our 1 o'clock session in the CPO's Acquisition Symposium. This is the 1 o'clock session titled Unleashing Creativity to Go Beyond It Has Always Been Done This Way and Achieve Mission-Focused Results. Today's production is a combined effort from our Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Agency and also our Office of Selective Acquisitions. So without wasting time, we're just going to jump right in it. We're going to introduce our team today. Our team are Hannah Musa, contracting officer from OSA. Say hi, Hannah.
Hello, everyone.
And Kirk Lawrence. He is our core and PM from Vulnerability Management from CISA.
How's it going?
And Harry Mortos. He was the tech chair for this procurement, also from CISA.
Hi, good afternoon.
And from now on, we're just going to use our first names, and that's it. So it'll be Hannah, Kirk, Harry, and Trevor, and I am with the pill. Now you'll see our kind of high-level agenda, just so you see where we're going. We're going to talk a little bit about our team, some of their experiences, some of the innovations they tried, and then we're going to dive right into their video proposals, virtual consensus, and skills lab. Those are going to be the three big areas that we cover. Okay, so we're going to jump right into it. And before we understand really the process or how we buy, it's critically important to explain what we're buying. So Kirk, could you give us, or Harry, could you give us a little bit of background on what NCAS is and what you all were looking to buy?
Absolutely. So the National Cybersecurity Assessments and Technical Services Team, or NCATS, within Legacy Cybersecurity Division National, or the MPPD, which no longer exists. We provide sort of offensive security cybersecurity assessments. The types of assessments range in duration and type, are risk and vulnerability assessments, high-value asset assessments, remote penetration tests are sort of shorter duration assessments where it's 1 or 2 weeks where we're really playing the role of the adversary, but in a more compressed time where we're trying to both access a customer's environment from the external side, testing their web applications, testing any external-facing infrastructure they have. We also do a red team assessment, which is a more prolonged and more detailed assessment where we're really replicating the tactics, techniques, and procedures that an advanced persistent threat or a nation-state actor would use if they were trying to compromise the government system. We provide this service to federal government, state, local, tribal, territorial governments, critical infrastructure, key resources sector. So that should really illustrate we really need high-level talent and competency to do these types of roles because a misstep when doing these offensive type of assessments can be catastrophic. So we really needed to make sure that we were getting the best of the best.
All right, that is more than a sufficient background. And what you'll see on the previous slide when we did the introductions is we called this the NCAT/VM. Hey, Kirk, would you care to explain why the difference in title?
Absolutely. So basically in December of 2018, the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency was formally established. So prior to that, NCATS, as Harry described, was a part of NCIC. And that's when we initiated this procurement action. And so all of the initial documentation had NCATS branding, all the solicitation had NCATS branding. However, once CISA was stood up, NCATS was rolled into Vulnerability Management Subdivision, which is a part of CISA. And so once the contract was awarded and everything post-award, we'll have the Vulnerability Management branding on it. So NCATS is now basically a part of Vulnerability Management.
Okay, and the reason we kept the first title in here is, one, if you go into the download box in the top right-hand corner, you can actually download the statement of work for the BPA, the solicitation, and the slides that we're covering today. We call those NCAPs because when the solicitation went out and when the evaluations were done, this was still called NCAP. Since it has been awarded and transitioned, as Kirk said, it is now called Vulnerability Management. So we'll kind of shift titles later, but for the purposes of the documentation and what we're talking about, we refer to this as the NCAP project all throughout its life. All right. Moving on now to slide 6. It's important to talk about this application and infusing of innovative techniques, but it's really important to understand kind of where our team is coming from and maybe why they were trying some of these things. So, Hannah, let's start with you. What's a little bit of your experience doing this kind of stuff?
Thank you, Trevor. So I started my contracting experience as a participant in the DHS Acquisition Professional Career Program. After completing the program, After completing the program, I started my final employment at CBP. I left CBP for OSA in 2018. So as the slide says, this is not my first rodeo. During my employment at CBP, I had the opportunity to be part of the source selection team for the integrated fixed tower acquisition. So I was able to view live demonstrations of the Opera's surveillance systems, and I traveled to Arizona to view those demonstrations.
Wonderful. Harry.
So unlike Hannah, this was my first rodeo. So I started working on this procurement almost 3 years ago when I first came on board at DHS. As we started putting the requirements together and figuring out how we were going to do this. I've worked on a couple procurements since, but nothing that implemented the some of the innovations and really interesting things that we did with this procurement.
All right, Kirk.
Sure, I'll pick up from there. I've 12 years at DHS total, 10 years in DHS Cyber as a project program manager. So I've always been doing some sort of procurement. Everything's always been paper-based, and we've all had the same struggles everyone else has had as far as getting really strong tech numbers, getting really strong, trying to streamline the process, trying to make sure you have the right contracts to support your program requirements. So just looking for ways to solve those problems when we kind of entered into this contracting opportunity.
Okay, and that's really, a theme here of these guys, and that's why we have our experiences that all lead into this project, NCAPS. So Hannah, Harry, Kirk, members, right into our NCAPS session. What you see at the bottom, the team didn't have direct experience with YouTube videos, confidence ratings, skills lab testing, or advisory down selects in the past. So now let's move right on to our innovations. So what you'll see here is we've done our oral presentation, advisory down select, streamlined documentation. The reason those aren't in a red bubble is because while those have been done many times before, especially at DHS, we have other trainings on those. So if you want to learn more, you can go into the PIL links box and go into the PIL webinar. Or you can find those on other links in the chat pod soon. So we're going to focus really on our on-the-spot virtual consensus, video proposal, and our skills lab testing. Okay, and Hannah's going to cover our evaluation approach for this procurement. Hannah?
So the procurement was a best value trade-off using a phase down select process with 4 evaluation factors. In phase 1, factor 1, top secret facility clearance, the vendors were required to provide proof of possession of a facility clearance at the secret level. Those that didn't meet this requirement were immediately excluded from further participation. After we completed phase 1, we invited those that passed, and all of them actually passed, to phase 2. Phase 2, factor 3, staffing and prior experience. The vendors were required to submit a 15-minute YouTube video submission where they were required to respond to scenario-based questions, to explain their plan to staff 2 concurrent assessments, to explain their strategy to retain their staff, and also to demonstrate that they have experience in performing the services. Also in this phase, we required the offerers to submit resumes for 2 key personnel. So the individuals that were presenting in the video would be the same individuals that would perform in the live demonstration. After we completed phase 2, we issued advisory notifications providing recommendations to proceed or not to proceed. There was only one offerer whom we provided recommendation not to proceed, but they decided to. So all of the vendors then proceeded to phase 3. Phase 3 involves conducting a live demonstration in an environment that simulates the NCAT's mission. And then finally, factor 4 was price, and that was a written submission. So that pretty much covers the phases and the different evaluation factors.
Yeah, and one thing, this was for multiple award BPAs off of a GSA schedule. And Kirk or Harry, could you refresh my memory? What was, the estimated dollar value?
I think we're about $83 million.
Okay. And was that for the entire program, or was that per agreement?
For the estimated value for the entire program.
Okay. And it's one of those where Hannah mentioned that the advisory down select, it was ineffective. And we'll note one thing. This was something where the team made a decision that they really wanted everybody who they thought was good to go through the technical capability assessment. And so they made factor 2 more important than factor 3. For most of our procurements that we coach, we recommend that the first step advisory down select factor be most important to carry that value further into phase 2. And so, the only thing that happened here was they let one more company into phase 2, or into phase 3. And so it's not the end of the world. And good for them. And obviously...
So sorry, Trevor, I
Go
just
ahead,
wanted
Hannah.
to correct that we started off
Yep.
as $83 million with a value, but the estimated value is $147 million.
Okay. I thought it was more around there.
I think that's it. Sorry.
That's okay. Okay, now we're going to transition over into slide 9, and we're going to start dissecting some of the strategy and process into our key focus areas for today. Okay, and the first thing we're going to talk about is our video proposals. So really first, why video proposals? Kirk.
I guess, when we started this whole process, I kind of touched on this earlier, but there were a number of problems I wanted to solve. One is how to get the best tech members for our evaluation, because we needed the most technical people we had, highest performers to participate in technical evaluation. And if I asked them to sit down in a room for weeks or months on end and to pour over 100-page paper evaluation or paper proposals, that was not going to work. One, these are highly technical people who are used to looking at screens and who are used to working on keyboards and were used to conducting assessments. They were not contracting folks. They had very little experience with contracting, and they would not be performing their best by evaluating a paper proposal. So getting them looking at a screen, whether it be a video proposal, evaluating the contractors performing assessments via the skills lab, was going to basically be leveraging what they do best in evaluating this proposal. So that was one of the reasons we leaned into the video proposal so hard. 2, it allowed us to streamline the process, right? As opposed to, again, evaluating, even if, however long the paper proposal is, we were basically able to get the questions answered within a 15-minute video, do an on-the-spot evaluation of that video, and then move forward. 3, I live in Delaware, so selfishly, we were able to do with the video, we were able to do remote evaluation. So I would not have to drive into the office on a daily basis, which is a minimum 2.5 hours one way. So there was a bit of a self-serving matter in there as well. So ultimately, it was about trying to create a situation where we could get the best people to participate in the evaluation and do it in a way that leveraged what they do best in the evaluation process.
Yeah. Hey, Kirk, we got some fellow folks from Delaware in the chat pod, so you're not alone, which is why we have, the little state of Delaware is right there. Now, one thing that Kirk didn't mention is he actually ended up not participating as a TEP member or in the actual evaluation, so it wasn't as big of a deal for him. But what I really wanted to pull the thread on as we were preparing for this, Kirk kind of brought this up, and I thought it was really important for everybody else. When you're taking into account how you're going to evaluate your procurements, really think about what is, one, the ability to get the best people, get the best technical evaluators into the evaluation. I'm sure you all have experience where people don't readily volunteer to be on a technical evaluation or on source selection. So it's really what is the best medium for those members to review, and then you kind of maybe back in the process there. And for this, he specifically was talking about these guys really like to just watch a video, and that was easy and apparent for them. Maybe a little bit differently, when I've worked with some of the folks at S&T, and it's a lot of scientists, sometimes they like to read papers, and they like to read about those in kind of scientific proposals and materials, but that's a little bit different. So make sure if you're preparing for a team, if you're preparing for an evaluation, really think about what does my technical evaluation team want to review, and how can I get the best members on those tests? Because I'm sure if you can do that, it'll take care of a lot of the other things for you. Harry, anything to add on that?
Yeah, so we also made it a point to limit the video submissions to 15 minutes, forcing the offers into that constrained time period. Really made sure that we weren't sitting for hours on end watching videos and monopolizing our time with little benefit. One of the other things that we also noticed was we made it a point in the solicitation to say that the vendors weren't being evaluated based on their production quality of the videos that they submitted. So from what we found, none of the vendors had really done anything that would have been considered extra to boost their production value, which made it more efficient and a better experience for everyone. We also required that the key personnel be the presenters on the videos. So we were ensuring that we were seeing the personnel that were going to come in and do the technical evaluation later, which also gave us the added benefit of when we asked technical questions, when they answered them, we could really tell if they knew what they were talking about just based on the language that they used and the things that they were talking about, the way they presented it, which really helped us right off the bat get a better feel for the offerers.
And Harry, that's a terrific segue into this next slide, which we're really going to cover about our virtual consensus. So you mentioned a little bit of the content and the glamour, but really take us through that virtual consensus process, and what did you guys do and how did you do it? And connected with this, there is a poll question on the bottom that kind of gauges, how have you purely done a virtual consensus before? So tell us a little bit about your process.
So we use Microsoft Teams primarily as our platform to be able to collaborate and share in real time. We had the entirety of the TET team in the room for the most part, but it also gave us flexibility. One of the TET members had an issue and couldn't be there one day, so we did it over Teams. It also allowed Kirk, should he have chosen to take part as a TET advisor, to be able to watch and see. And Trevor and Polly, I believe you dialed in the first day as well and were able to work with us on that. But that said, as I'm sure everyone knows, due to the current operating environment, everything has a bit of a learning curve, and I definitely encourage anyone who does this in the future to allow for some time to work through any technology issues. Despite the fact that we were all IT specialists in the room, it still took us a few minutes to sort of get everybody on the same page so that we could move forward. But we did find an efficient and effective way to move through it. We had provided the vendors in advance the questions that they were to answer. They recorded the video. They submitted the secure YouTube link to us. So we set up in the room or on Teams and would stream the video, would watch it in real time. We would pause the video after each question and discuss their responses and reach a consensus and take notes in real time before moving on to the next question until the video was done. We felt that this really helped us capture all of the thoughts of the tech team and really helped us do this in an efficient manner time-wise. As far as the documenting of findings in real time, being able to go through that was really beneficial, but we also had asked the vendors to provide written proposals that we found were useful to refer back to fill out our consensus forms.
All right, and Hannah, so obviously as the CEO, you were participating in the virtual consensus as you normally would in a regular consensus. So maybe what was your perspective by the videos and then doing the virtual consensus with the teams?
Well, watching the videos firsthand, I could tell those that were knowledgeable about the subject matter and those that weren't. I could also tell those that were those videos that were scripted, and some of the scripted videos you could see that the presenters were struggling through answering the questions. And those that weren't scripted, you could tell that the presenters were comfortable and confident in their presentations. It was also actually neat to see the guys communicating via Teams and providing their opinions of how the offerors were performing in real time. So it was very neat, actually, and interesting to watch it firsthand.
Absolutely, and that's a good point. We did have our poll question, and we kind of asked, have you done of your purely virtual consensus before? We had 22% of folks say yes. Only one person say yes, and I did it before. It was the only choice. I think that means, kind of our environment right now, that's our only option. So we have more that are planning to do it, but they haven't done it yet. And then we have about 15 folks that say, no, never too difficult. Well, for those 15 folks, I don't know what you're doing for the rest of the year, if you're co-located or if you're not in person. But I hope you would reconsider. There is a way to do it, and there's definitely people, such as the folks on this call, who would be more than willing to talk to you about their process. Okay, we're going to move right along. We did have a question in the chat pod that says, how do you ensure that the videos submitted are not just infomercials? Best practice to ensure contract control submittals. So, Harry, I think one of the ways that you guys did was your 15-minute video was purely based on questions for them to respond to. And in your solicitation, you had language that said, we are looking at substance and content. We are not looking at flashy gimmicks or infomercials. I think you said that proved to be effective. Is that right?
Yeah. So between limiting the time, providing questions up front, stating that they weren't going to be evaluated based on the production value of the video, and requiring that the key personnel were the ones actually presenting, prevented the video from coming off as an infomercial. We had a certain amount of content they had to cover. They couldn't bring in a salesperson to come in and do their pitch on the video, and they didn't need to spend any sort of money or investment on production value or anything along those lines.
All right, good thoughts. And if folks do have questions, we do have someone dedicated to answer those in real time. And as we see them and we have time, we'll try to answer them on the slide where we are so we don't have to go back and revisit it. But we are going to move right along. So now let's transition into the next topic, which is our skills lab. So there's a few slides dedicated to the skills lab, and the skills lab was how this team did their technical capability assessment. So we say take one because there was an incident. Kirk, would you mind taking us through this incident?
Yes. Yes, there was in fact an incident. There was a series of unfortunate events that happened one night that could probably never be replicated even if you tried. And if you put it into a movie, you probably wouldn't even believe it. But ultimately, the series of events led to one thing. It led to a nozzle on a fire suppression system that was over the top of the server rack malfunctioning. and basically spewing water onto a server all night long. That server held is where we were hosting our skills lab. And so obviously the server was ruined, and come to find out, we did not have a good backup for the skills lab, which, oops. So, amongst many other, yeah, big whoops there. So amongst the many other things, many other issues that this presented, we had to obviously figure out what to do next. So we could either try to reverse engineer the previous skills lab, because we were able to find some older, outdated versions, and maybe try to kind of reconfigure those to get to where we were. But instead, we kind of did some research, and we realized that we could use it as an opportunity to create a newer, better, faster skills lab. We'd gotten a little bit smarter since the initial iteration that we had developed. And so we did our research. We found a new hosting environment that was in the cloud. We found, we had better information, to be honest. And so we developed a new skills lab, version 2.0. We hosted in the cloud, so no more flooding issues, hopefully. We made sure that it's backed up sufficiently. And ultimately, again, do a better version that was used for the evaluation. It will continue to be used for evaluations as we have the capacity to onboard additional vendors to this VPA as needed down the road to meet increasing capacity. And so it ended up, obviously, it was unfortunate what had happened. It created a delay in the schedule, but we ended up with a better tool for evaluating vendors. So every cloud, right?
Yeah, and before Harry has his perspective, I will note that the picture is an actual dramatization. It's not the actual room. I don't know how it actually looked. All I can recall is getting the email from Kirk when it happened, and it was so dire at the time. And it's like, oh, no, what are we going to do? This was so much effort. But, when you look back, there's always some perspective, and the time didn't seem to be affecting the mission. And it ended up being, maybe a better outcome at the end of the day. It's kind of the holistic approach. So I give a kudos to that team for not stopping. I mean, at that point, Kirk, you didn't just say, oh, we're done, and now we are going to revert back to some other form. You said, no, we're gonna figure this out, and we're going to get through it. We're not going to sacrifice our technical evaluation. We're going to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. We knew it was the best approach to get us the best contract to support our mission requirements, right? And so while it was unfortunate, it didn't deter us on our path. So we just knew we had to do a little bit more work, and we did it, and we ended up where we wanted to be.
All right. And Harry, did you have anything to add before I get to a question in the chat pod?
Just that while you say it's a dramatization, Trevor, it's really not that far off from what actually happened.
No, that's funny. So Harry, at the time, really, how did this skills lab come to be? We said there was a newer, better version. So how did that happen? Was it the same people from before, or did you convene a new team or a new panel of people to create the new skills lab?
Yeah, so we put together a whole new team, and in order to preserve the integrity of the competition, it had to be developed by an entirely federal team. So we pulled our most technically competent federal staff who work on this project, who have years of experience out in the field of doing these types of assessments, and we pulled them all in and basically fast-tracked the development of basically recreating Skills Lab 2.0. So we built a completely new network of virtual machines hosted up in the cloud. There were roughly about 35 machines in the environment. It replicated an entire Windows enterprise network. There were elements that were replicating industrial control systems and SCADA systems in there as well as fully functioning websites with back-end servers and a demilitarized zone. I don't want to get too into the weeds, but it was incredible how that effort came to be, and we would be remiss if we didn't give thanks to that team that worked with us to put that together on such short notice.
Outstanding. Yeah, it's always good to give kudos where they are deserved, even if those folks want to remain nameless because they don't need the glamour and the glory. That's okay. So we won't call them out today. All right. We did have one question, Hannah, before we move too far away from the videos. How were the videos captured to become a part of the contract file, or were they at all?
Yes. So we had the offeror submit electronic submissions as well as CDs. So we have a copy of their videos electronically as well as on CDs. So that's how we kept it in the contract file.
Okay, well, there's your answer. You know, on another note, if some folks out there are thinking of using YouTube videos for their preferred video submissions, which can be quite simple, one function that YouTube has is they have a direct export of the closed captions that have to during the video that comes standard in YouTube. So that could be, you know, an easy way to keep that as part of the file as the transcript from the video that comes straight out of YouTube. So that might be beneficial as well, rather than have them submit a CD, a DVD, or a digital file. If you have long videos, sometimes it's hard to send digitally. Okay, let's move right along. Okay, so this slide kind of indicates some key areas of the statement of work and the solicitation for maybe the who, what, when, where, why, and how. We've talked about the why a little bit, but Harry, I still don't really understand what the skills lab is or what they're doing. Could you walk that through us for a little bit?
Yeah, so let me walk you through what the technical evaluation looked like. So the teams showed up. They were put in a room in our lab with 2 workstations, 1 per key personnel, where we had signed into the cloud environment and gotten them access. They were given access initially to only 2 Kali Linux operating system virtual machines. Kali is pretty much an industry standard for penetration testing and offensive security type tasks. They had access to the internet to be able to do research while they were in the environment, although there was no internet access inside the actual skills lab. So none of the machines that were part of the exercise had internet access to keep vulnerable virtual machines off any type of network access. So that said, we walked them in, we sat them down, we gave them their access, and we gave them an initial in-brief, letting them know what was in bounds and what was out of bounds for the assessment. It's very important on our engagements that we're limited to the scope that's provided by the stakeholder who we're providing our assessment for. So that was something that we were really looking out for, was whether or not they would abide by the rules of engagement that we provided them. After that, we sent them on their way, and they got to work. We had 2 55-inch monitors in the front of the room so that the tech could see every keystroke and every command that they were running while they were in the environment, which was absolutely critical. We found that as we were sitting there and we were watching their technique and their approach, we could really determine whether or not they were of the skill level that we would expect to work on our assessments, just based on what tools they used first and the way they approached the environment and how they did their reconnaissance, and whether or not they kept a live log of their activities as they were going through that they could reference back to later. And all of these things that really helped us sort of understand how they approach the problem and whether or not it's something that would be compatible with the way that we do our assessments. So while doing that, it's worth noting there was no lunch break. They were in there for 8 hours consistently, hacking away, and it proved to be really effective. We had the utmost confidence, and we continue to have the utmost confidence that in doing so, we were able to select the best vendors who had competed on the RFP.
No, that's great background. And like you said, this was pulled straight out of the solicitation. So they had the text. They knew that they were getting these Kali Linux versions. They knew that they were getting a Mac to work on. So none of that was of a surprise. They weren't walking in completely cold. Hannah, one question I have for you was, it says 2 weeks after the advisory letter was when you sent this out. Can you talk to us a little bit about the timing?
Yes, so we had initially planned on conducting the demos 1 week after the advisory letter went out, but there were scheduling conflicts with some of the offerors. So trying to be accommodating, we allowed a 1 week extension, which actually was good for the vendors to come in and do their demos, because that 2 weeks also allowed us to schedule with security and getting badges and also getting them access to the demonstration room. So 2 weeks was a sufficient time enough for us to conduct the demos.
Yeah, and that's an important point. And you know, we've kind of determined the best practice when maybe doing that down select and you have that bulky submission in phase 2, whether it's an oral presentation or maybe it's a skills lab test. 2 weeks seems to be a good sufficient time to give them to prepare, and that's what ended up working for you guys. So I guess I will take that as a continue to do as a best practice. If it's something even crazier, then maybe 3 weeks doesn't hurt. It's all about what time you have in your schedule and how much you can allot for doing those assessments. So we do have our question on the bottom, and we said, have you done an all-day test when buying IT services before? So, you know, to keep it similar to what we're doing, we really just asked about IT services. So we have a few folks out there who did it and they loved it. A lot of people plan on doing it soon. Maybe after this the session's over, that's when they plan on doing it. And that's great. We have some real experts in the room who can definitely give you their lessons learned. And we have a few people who say, no, never, too difficult. Well, if you think about getting a flood and a fire suppression system failing, then I would agree, no, never, it could be too difficult. But that's the risk you take sometimes for trying to do something different. Okay. Now let's move along. We're on slide 13 now. And this really is just a snippet from the solicitation to give folks a visual understanding of how the process went. So I think Harry said something, and since Hannah, you're kind of the driver in the room, did you really not offer any lunch breaks? Did anybody eat a full lunch during the demo?
Actually, no one ate a full lunch. Most of the offerers came in with, they brought their snacks, so all of them actually snacked through the demonstrations. And I think there was probably only one company or offer that they walked through the demos. But nobody had a full lunch.
Well, hey, did any of the government evaluators or folks have lunch?
Oh, we ate well, Trevor. Don't worry.
There we go. I think Kirk said he took his full lunch every day. Is that right, Kirk?
I did indeed, Trevor. I did indeed.
Just like me. And there's no way I'd be skipping that. Okay. Now let's move right along to some more. Now this is an actual snippet from the MS Teams thread with Harry and his guys. So Harry, walk us through this.
So the entire TET team was in the room with the offerers as they were going through the skills lab, which prevented us from being able to do any communication verbally to talk about the things that they were doing, the things that we liked, the things that we didn't like. I think you'll see examples of both in that chat log that you see up there. This really was invaluable. I can't overstate how valuable this was to us, because not only did it allow us to communicate in the room, it also gave us a log, essentially, of everything that we were seeing. This essentially was shorthand for our notes. So anytime we were able to reference back to this to look at what we liked, what we didn't like, it was absolutely key to our execution.
No, and honestly, I think this is so cool. And I was going back to my MS Teams notes, cleaning up some old channels I wasn't using. And then I stumbled across this, and I said, hey, this is still up there, and it's still active. So that's always pretty cool. We did have a question. Can the Teams discussion thread be exported?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that.
You know, I would take an educated guess with Microsoft and how compatible all their platforms are. I would guess yes, but that's something that would just be a guess. Kirk, you don't have any better guess?
I've never done it before.
Or maybe someone...
Yeah, I've never done it before, but I'm inclined to think that there's got to be a way.
Well, hey,
so Trevor, I will say this
go ahead.
So with similar Microsoft products, it's possible to do things like that, but sometimes it requires an administrator to go in and do it for you. So it may not necessarily be something that the end user could do on their own.
Gotcha. And so we had a couple questions earlier, Hannah, and one of those was, did this actually, like, how was this captured for the evaluation by the contracting office? And so I think your process from using Teams in Phase 2 as well as Phase 3 was pretty similar. So could you tell us maybe when this was done, how you all captured that, consensus documentation?
Yes. So for the conversations that were taking place at the end of the demos, I asked Harry to provide copies for the file. And in terms of taking the confidence, not taking the confidence, but assigning the ratings, so the confidence ratings, it was similarly the same thing. Once the guys were finished with their ratings or their decisions or conversations, and I participated in most of those conversations. All of those things were put in bulleted forms, which is actually very new to me because I'm very used to writing like long narrative stories for my evaluation. So it was very interesting and difficult to have to write those evaluations in the technical evaluation portion in a bulleted summary fashion. But it was a new experience. It was something definitely new to learn, and I think going forward for other evaluations, we would be using the same format as well.
Well, good. So I think that definitely satisfies the question that came through. Now, when you talk about your consensus documentation, is really what becomes part of the contract file. And since you guys didn't talk about the export of the virtual notes, then I'm guessing that these virtual notes you have in MS Teams did not become part of the official contract file.
No, they did not. We didn't make them part of the contract file. So
okay. That's good to know, and that does satisfy the question. So let's jump right into slide 15. Let's talk a little bit about the lessons learned from the Skills Lab. Harry, obviously, I think this was your baby at the time, being the tech lead. So do you want to start off with some of your lessons learned?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that we mentioned earlier that I want to expand upon is we had talked about how they had access to the internet during the evaluation. We were monitoring them to make sure that they weren't using any chat applications. So we had notified them in advance that they would not be able to reach back to their home offices or anything like that. They were limited to whatever they could find on the open internet. They weren't allowed to log into Google Chat or Hangouts or anything like that to be able to converse and ask questions of the folks back home. That said, we did notice a variety of approaches from the vendors, which really helped inform our decisions as far as who we thought had skills in certain areas, and who of the offerers was best suited to our assessments. Everybody sort of approached it from a different aspect, and even two vendors who look at the same problem and approach it from a different angle or choose to use a different tool to essentially do the same thing. It was important to us to have the flexibility to be able to not limit it to one particular approach, because oftentimes in problem sets like these, there's more than one way to solve these types of problems and to gain the access that they needed to gain. That said, they were all in the same environment. They approached it from different angles. Some of them were more effective than others, which left us with the offers that we felt were most able to perform successfully on our assessments. But that said, anything like this does not go without its hiccups, and it seemed like irony was not done with us just after the flood. We did experience a brief power outage during the execution of the skills lab when one of the vendors was in the building. We were all sitting in the room and the lights flickered off and then flickered back on, and everybody sort of looked at each other and said, well, what do we do now? So luckily it turned out to not be a big problem. The power came back on immediately. It took a few minutes for all of our networking gear to power back on and to get everybody back on the internet. But since everything was cloud hosted, we were able to just log back into the platform, and we picked up without a hitch. We granted them extra time at the end of the assessment to compensate for the time that they lost during the power outage, and we carried on as best we could.
So Hannah, when it comes down to those kind of things happening, obviously this is, you're the CO, you're there. It's your call. So you decided that it made enough sense to give them an extra 15 minutes back to accommodate for the time lost. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. We gave them that extra 15 minutes for the time lost. And they were actually very concerned that they wouldn't get that time back, but it's just very fair to have given them that time back.
I could say that you're nicer than most, but I would hope if any similar situation happened for those out there, it only makes sense to give them the time back that was missed. And if something similar happens this year when you're doing a virtual consensus, or when you're doing a virtual video presentation or something like that, then that makes sense too. So as long as the contracting officer, makes a call and it's fair and equitable to whomever it happens to, that's usually a best practice. If you can't give 15 minutes to one if the power cuts out, not to the next. You just got to be consistent with how you treat your floaters throughout the process. We did have a couple questions, Hannah, for you and the team. Did you video record these all-day demos?
No, we did not do that.
You did not.
No, we just
I believe.
No, we didn't. Mm-hmm. We just were in the room for 7.5 hours, and the guys were. This is what they do for a living, so they're very excited. For me, sometimes it was very painful because sometimes it was like watching paint dry in what the operators were doing. but sometimes it was a little difficult sitting through it.
You don't like to just
don't let Hollywood fool you. Hacking is actually very
right.
It's not as fun as it looks in Hollywood.
I was going to say, there wasn't Mountain Dew allowed in that lunch break, was there? And that,
I'm sorry, say that again?
And I said there wasn't Mountain Dew allowed in that lunch break, was there, for the hacking and pen testers? But it does bring up a good point. Your solicitation said the government may record. To record everything that happened during the day, maybe that would have been difficult, maybe not, but the decision is always the government's decision should they choose to, and that's the final call. And as long as you're consistent with that, and the team makes a team-based decision, the contracting officer and the program management office and the evaluation team and the local cognizant attorney, as long as you're on the same page, then you can support whichever approach you want to do. Okay, and we're going to move right along to slide 16 and kind of transition away from that. And I thought it would be helpful if we spent a little bit of time, because this is more recently, when we talk about the Skills Lab and the videos, those were done, later last year, but the BPA award process was done a little bit more recently. So maybe, let's see, Kirk, you want to talk to us a little bit about the kickoff process, maybe how this was different than some you've done before, because you are our acquisition guru.
I wish. For me, I'm always trying to save time where I can save time, not just for myself, but for everybody that I work with. And so it was obviously a multiple award BPA, awarded to 5 separate vendors. And as Hannah and I were putting together the kickoff presentation, I realized that the bulk of the information that we presented at these kickoff meetings was the same. And so the question I had for Hannah is, instead of doing 5 separate kickoff meetings, can we consolidate this into a single kickoff meeting? And then obviously provide opportunities for the vendors to ask questions, either in front of all the other vendors at the kickoff meetings, or separately, or outside the kickoff meeting that we obviously provide answers to. basically in the spirit of trying to, be more efficient and save time, right? Instead of take 5 down into 1. And HANA was graciously accommodating to that, which not only saved her and I time, but the entire program office and the task leads and everybody that participated saved a lot of time for them as well. So everyone's really appreciative that we were able to do that.
And I would only think the more larger multiple award contracts and BPAs that we do across the department, joint kickoffs, just like industry days, may be a best practice. And I'll be the first to say that I don't think this is a norm for how some of our program offices do their kickoff sessions. But maybe it can be in the future to save us, definitely time and energy. Because energy is definitely important right now. Let's see. So that's the kickoff. Hannah, any words on the kickoff? Was it beneficial? Did you appreciate the process?
Yes, it was definitely beneficial. I mean, as Kirk said, it saved us time. And one of the things that I did in advance of the meeting, I asked the contractors to submit questions. So we generally had an idea of what the questions would be. And fortunately, all of those had been captured in our presentation. So it definitely saved time.
Yeah, and to build upon
Hey,
to build upon that, and after the kickoff meeting, when I was queried by my leadership about how it went, my response was, when we finished the presentation, there were almost no questions, and because of what Han had done prior to the meeting, as far as eliciting questions from the vendors, we answered those as part of the presentation, so there were really no questions left. So in my mind, it was a very successful meeting.
Good. And did you guys get any feedback from the vendors of how it went, or you think silence is golden?
No, we had feedback from at least three contractors who came back and said that the session was very informative and that we answered all of their questions.
Good. So I think that brings us into our next bucket, which might be a little bit different for some people who are listening, is you did these initial task orders to start getting folks on board. Could you talk to us a little bit about the reason why you did that and maybe the process for doing it?
Well, in the solicitation, we included language to say, as far as the suitability processing is concerned, that we will process suitability either at the BPA level or issue a no-cost order to all of the BPA awardees without further competition to allow the contractors to begin suitability. So what we ended up doing was we awarded the no-cost BPA awardees. That was actually done the day before yesterday. And then in the RFQ, we also had language that stated that the contractors that achieve proper suitability at a staffing level of 6 employees to support 2 concurrent RVAs, they will be eligible to compete for orders. So the contractors that meet this requirement would be eligible to compete for orders. And right now, I'm actually in the process of doing our ordering guide and what the evaluation factors will be and what the evaluation process will be. And you guys are actually helping us on that front.
Yeah, and we'll dive into that a little bit more thoroughly in just a second. Hey, Kirk, when we talked about, it says ordering, once each company has 2 staff teams, and Hannah mentioned it was about 6 folks, through suitability, then the task ordering can be in. So why 2 teams? Why not more? Why not fewer? What if this takes 2 years to achieve? Can you not order until then? What does your experience tell you about that process?
I think, well, the 2 staff teams really, that is tied directly to what we're anticipating the size of our orders will be. And that would be the minimum size of the staff that would be needed in order for them to compete for some of the orders that we're planning on competing later this fiscal year. So that's how we kind of settled on that. And, obviously, it's not our first rodeo. We know how long it takes to get people through suitability. It shouldn't take 2 years. If it does, then there's a massive problem, and it's bigger than this particular contract. So, yeah, so it's just based on experience, based on our analysis of our ordering strategy, the number of orders we're going to do, when we're going to do them, and it just seemed like the appropriate approach.
Yeah, and I think what you had told me previously is you expect that process to be done, maybe in the next month or two.
Absolutely.
All right, that's good. Okay, now let's move on, because I'd definitely like to spend some time on slide 17, really talking about your future ordering, the processes, and how that looks. And, for the folks online, if you have ideas of future ordering and how that's going, please feel free to drop some tips in here, and maybe we can talk about those. But you can see the goals that are on the left. This is much more, Harry was the tech chair. He has moved to a different branch. He is now out of this. So Harry is he talks about how the procurement was done, how the evaluation was run. That was his wheelhouse. But now Kirk is kind of the PM and the core on the vulnerability management BPA. So now this is right back into his wheelhouse. So this is really going to be Kirk and Hannah maybe sharing a little bit about what are some of their goals and maybe the comfort level or the possibility of doing this. So Kirk, why don't you start with maybe what some of your goals are for the future ordering process?
Absolutely. And just to touch on the Harry piece, Harry's last official duty as a member of NCAT's VM was to get this BPA awarded as tech chair. So once Hannah signed on the dotted line, Harry was free to go pursue other endeavors. So appreciate you, Harry. But basically, I'm glad that Hannah and I get along really well, because when it comes to the ordering, I've basically articulated some goals that she and I are going to do our best to try to achieve, and some of them are listed here on the slide. But ultimately, we're going to have multiple orders against this BPA, varying in size and varying in size. We know that we're going to be scaling the number of assessments we do over the next few years, and so we're going to have to do multiple orders in order to meet that growth. We want the evaluations for these competitive orders to be quick and streamlined, to the point, like the challenge that I've thrown down is to try to get the evaluations done in a day. If one day becomes two, I can live with that, but let's shoot for a day and see what we can do. Let's limit our factors to the most important things, right? We've already evaluated these vendors at the highest levels at the class level as far as the BPA. So let's just, from the order perspective, what are the most important things we need to know in order to decide on who's the best for this particular order? So factors, there's price, and then there's going to be some interviews, like some sort of oral presentation where just figuring out if the people that are going to be on this particular order are the most qualified. We want the documentation, much like it was that Hannah and Harry described on the original BPA technical evaluation. We want it to be brief. We don't want volumes and volumes of paperwork. We want it to be thorough. We want it to be concise, and we want it to answer all the questions. But we don't want it to be, but we don't want it to be more than necessary. And so ultimately, we just want everything to be as efficient as possible, and also. The last point I want to make, and this is something that I've reiterated time and again in talking with Hannah, is we want to be evolving and we want to learn each time we go through the process. We want to learn as we go through. If something works, we want to continue to use it. If something doesn't work, we want to make sure we acknowledge that and move on from it and find something that works better. And so we just need to kind of approach it with a humility that we're going to continue to refine it and make it better and better and better each time through. And in doing so, we will finally land on the thing that works the best for us.
Yeah, I think
of course,
what you said, Kirk, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead, Trevor.
I said I think what you said in preparation from this was, if it doesn't work, we'll throw it in the trash and we'll do something else. So I didn't include the trash comment in here, but it still rang true for me. You're right. There's no humility. Throw it away. Let's try something else if this isn't working. So that's your goal now. when you get these, when you get the requirements to do some of these RVAs and pen tests, you don't have months and months to send it out and solicit it sometimes. Sometimes it has to be quick. So you're not just innovating for the sake of doing it. This sometimes meets a real mission need for you all, correct?
It is, and even from a growth perspective, right? We're going from an anticipated output of on the RVA 90 RVA pre-COVID for this year, ramping up to potentially 230 in FY21. And so we have to have the contracts in place to obviously meet that growth. And so this is our avenue to do it. So so we have to be able to move fast, and we know we have the contract in place to do it. We just have to make sure we get the processes aligned accordingly.
And so, Hannah, does all of this sound copacetic for you?
Well, I know that when Kirk told me about doing the evaluations in one day, I looked at him and was like, "You're crazy." It's definitely ambitious, but I want to do anything to support my customer, but I think we have to take a realistic approach, because the RFQs will depend on the scope and size of the statement of work, the requirement, and it may require longer than one day evaluation. So we have two evaluation factors, price and technical. So we deliberately did not want to put more than two evaluation factors in order to have a streamlined approach. So I'm here to support my customer. There's going to be some growing process along the way, but as we go, we will refine the process, and as Kirk says, we'll do away with what doesn't work.
All right, sounds good. And we kind of asked a question down below when we said, what's the quickest you've completed a procurement from solicitation to award for a service requirement over $20 million on a BPA? So we got real specific here. We did have quite a few folks that said under 14 days. Well, if it was under 14 days, well, maybe let's throw some tips out here for all the folks who the quickest one was over 90 days or 61 to 90 days. I think part of the aspect of where Kirk's head was, and we've talked about this before, is, one, these vendors have already been evaluated and received federal supply schedules from GSA. Two, they've already been reevaluated in our skills tests and on our staffing videos to get a BPA award under the GSA schedule from us. Now that we're doing the orders, we don't need to reevaluate all of these hierarchy principles for the third time when it's already been done twice for a contract award and then for a BPA. And so now when you're getting into the task order, it's really about the specifics of the upcoming work and maybe the price. And like we said, that's going to be a trade-off. That's not going to be price determinative or anything else. It'll be a combination of both. So we're certainly willing to listen to any advice. And we did have a question that came in about, is there a written template of this process anywhere it was successful? Kirk, is there a written process of this template yet?
We're working on it. Hannah actually provided me a draft ordering guide yesterday, and today's supposed to be my day off, but I will try to work on it. Now, we hope to have a draft ordering guide back to Hannah probably next week. So if folks are interested in looking at it, we'll have something here shortly.
Absolutely. And we did have a comment that, we absolutely have a responsibility to go over our evaluation process. We have a responsibility to make sure what we need is there. And so the point behind this specific process is they've already been determined a couple times. The BPA has already determined that each company has, one, the experience, and that they have the technical know-how to win a spot on the BPA. So we don't need to reevaluate our specific BPA. We're going to do specifically within the new requirements for each individual task order, and that's really the focus of every single assessment and RVA that goes out to the workforce. At least that was your thought, right, Kirk?
Exactly.
All right. Kirk's as soon as we told him that we wanted him to contribute to this CPO symposium, he said, that's actually my first day off in quite some time. But here he is. He's a good man, and he's here with us today. Hannah, we have a question. Do you have a legal rep review your virtual game plan before going ahead? Maybe it's this ordering process.
And I do plan to submit it for policy and legal review before it's actually put into effect.
Okay, there you go. Moving right along, we have some final thoughts. Let's go sequentially. So Kirk, why don't you start? Final thoughts.
I think so much of what we did with this procurement, whether it was the videos or the skills labs or the advisory down select or just a lot of the, or even some of the stuff with the ordering, it's ultimately been the first time when our organization has tried to do these things. And so each step of the way, I was joking with Trevor, I've spent most of my time having to explain it at every step of the process, to every individual in the process at every level of the bureaucracy. And it's constantly re-explaining and re-explaining. And then when everybody understands what you're trying to do and everybody's on board with what you're trying to do, then somebody leaves, somebody new comes in, and you have to re-explain it once again. And so that was probably the most challenging part for me over the life of trying to get this BPA awarded. Was just this constant educating and re-educating of the people that were a part of the process and all the various directions a procurement goes. But at the end of the day, I knew this was the right way to ensure that we got the contract that best supported our mission requirements. And I was, until someone could make a compelling case otherwise, this is the direction that we were going to go. And over the course of how the length of time it took to award this BPA, no one was able to make a compelling case to change our approach. So yeah, that's what, Trevor kind of paraphrased me here, but it can be exhausting, it can be frustrating, and you have to repeat yourself 1,000 times, but ultimately, it's about getting to that contract that best supports your mission requirements.
Yeah, and I pulled on that thread a little bit with Kirk because I told him it sums up, sometimes how you feel as a coach. But it's always, there's so much to be thankful for when you're done. It's kind of like when you run a marathon. You hated running it, but when you're done, you feel so accomplished. You met your goals. And so this was a really important point. And there's also a cheesy quote about a river that cuts a rock because it's persistent. And, Kirk is a river, and that's what I'm trying to say. Kirk, you're the river. Thank you for being persistent. Let's transition to Harry. Harry, I know we talked about confidence rating, but anything else on your mind?
Yeah, absolutely. So first and foremost, I have to give sincere thanks to Trevor and Polly for all of their support in getting this done. It absolutely could not have happened without you. Definitely want to express my gratitude. Also, Kirk had previously mentioned that I have moved on to another role. Interestingly enough, I was asked last year to lead the President's Cup cybersecurity competition, which this procurement definitely influenced a lot of our thinking of how we structured that. So real quick, it was there were 2 qualifying rounds, or down selects, if you will, and it all accumulated in an 8-hour day at our facility in Arlington for the final round of the competition, where, again, there was no lunch. So it was eerily similar, and the knowledge gleaned from both of those efforts definitely influenced each other as we move forward with it. And just to build on what's on the slide, confidence ratings absolutely kept the ball rolling on everything that we did and were instrumental to getting this procurement done.
Okay, and now Hannah, anything else you'd like to add?
Yes. Again, as I stated, that watching the offerers firsthand in answering the questions and identifying and seeing those that were knowledgeable and weren't knowledgeable, it was very interesting to see. So I'm definitely a proponent of using the oral presentations going forward. Unfortunately, you can't escape a price proposal, so you have to read those proposals. But definitely having the orals saves some time in the evaluation process. And using bulleted summary points, that's something new to me. So I look forward to the next solicitation in implementing or using that format as well.